Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate you setting this up today, and I'm excited to get started. It is 2 o'clock, and we want to start on time and be respectful of everybody's time in joining us today. So first, welcome to everybody. My name is Dr. Andrea Tejedor. I'm the director of our advisory services program for Bluum. And for those of you that are joining that are not familiar with Bluum, we are North America's largest educational technology reseller. And our mission is to improve learning and make sure that it's more accessible. We support districts through a wide range of products and services, but today we're really going to be focused on sharing information about our grant advisory program. And specifically, we're going to be talking about the School Violence and Prevention Program grant by the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, also known as COPS. The funding is available to states, units of local government, Indian tribes, and their public agencies to improve security at schools and on school grounds in the recipient's jurisdiction through evidence-based school safety programs. So I'm joined today by Sarah Bavay. She introduced us. Also, Eureka Meziab, who is our grants and funding specialist. And Eureka is going to be taking the lead today, and she's going to walk through us the agenda and get us started. Eureka?
Great, thank you. So thank you for joining us today. We have a packed agenda to go through what the application process looks like at this point for COPS. So if you had joined us in our previous webinar, we went through the general application, but today we'll go through every step of the process where you'll be preparing your narrative and data collection and budget for your project. We'll first go through the timeline that's published by COPS, the administrative steps that you should take, and then we'll dive into the abstract, data collection, narrative, budget, and supportive documents, as well as available resources from us and from the funding agency. So thanks, Andrea, for summarizing SVPP. I wanted to go over the statutes to ensure that your project is within the funding guidelines for SVPP. The first is the acquisition and installation of technology for expedited notification to law enforcement during an emergency. The second is coordination with local law enforcement, placement and use of metal detectors, locks, lighting, and other deterrent measures, training for local law enforcement officers to prevent school violence, as well as any other measures that the COPS office director determines may significantly improve security. The award amount is a federal max of $500,000. So that's the federal portion with a required 25% match, a local match from your school district. All right. Currently, our timeline is looking like the next resource webinar is provided by the COPS office directly, and that's April 25th, 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern time. The next deadline, if you would like Bluum assistance for application review, is May 8th. So if you would like to get feedback for your application, please get it in by May 8th so we can definitely turn it around before the deadlines that's determined by the COPS office, which is May 10th to submit your SF424 and SFLLL. That's the lobbying documents in grants.gov. Then when you register for grants.gov, then you'll get a Just Grants login. And to submit the full application, you'll have to submit it by May 17th through Just Grants. But we really advise you to get it in before that day. This is a review from our past webinar, but the administrative steps that you can take right now is to register for SAM. This is a federal grant, so it will be using the federal award management system called SAMS. You will need a UEI to register and documentation of who your point person is for this grant. Register for grants.gov is also recommended that you do early so you can move on with your other steps and get your lobbying activity in as well as the SF 454. Another important step is for you to know what your internal steps are within your district to submit a federal grant. It's different for all school districts, so knowing what that is going to be crucial to make sure that you can add these extra steps and account for them before you submit your application. The last thing is to review your school safety planning efforts. You will be asked what the following are in your SVPP application. So it's very important that you know what the most updated status of these planning efforts are, and if there's been and why there's been changes if there has been. So there's the site and risk assessments, the emergency operation plan, the school climate improvement efforts and initiatives, what those are, threat assessment, processes and procedures, training and drills, and any local safety partnerships that you've forged in your years. All right. I wanted to get started with what the review process from what our funder will look like. So you get to have you get to know what the grading criteria is for your application. They will first go through a weighted methodology to review your program's impact, how much it improves security needs, and your need for federal assistance. Once they have a weighted methodology score for your application, they will go through a programmatic review where your narrative questions are assessed based on the presence of catastrophic events, as well as your other school safety climate considerations. The first thing that you will do when you get into Just Grants is to submit a proposal abstract. So this is a brief summary of what your project will entail, including your what your district is, your project partners, what the title of the project is. You'll also outline the purpose of the project, the primary activities, as well as the key partners and who will ultimately benefit from this project. So you'll be able to, I know everyone's in the ideation phase of determining what intervention is necessary for your school and what you're applying for. So once you get a general idea of this, you can start working on the proposal abstract, which will summarize and guide your entire application. The next step for Just Grants is the security need and fiscal need data collection. This will be questions about your service population, the fiscal health of the district that you operate, the scope of the program's impact, including the number of schools and students impacted. So you'll have to be ready to identify where you will be implementing your security interventions, so you can get those data. You'll be primarily reporting on the school district school year of 2022 to 2023, except for the incident reports to law enforcement. Those are reports from 2021 to 2022. So you'll have to identify who those key personnel are in your district that will know what the data collection is asking for. So the major components of this section is data related to your currently implemented safety measures, then the risk assessment process, incidents that involve law enforcement, and then other background information. And the next part is the narrative proposal. This is the writing section. COPS is really seeking for a comprehensive approach to school safety, and they're looking for how this proposed project integrates with your already existing comprehensive school safety and climate planning efforts. You'll be required, if you're proposing a technology component of the project, to justify how you are strategically protecting students' civil and privacy rights as well. Major components of this section is descriptions of your school safety planning efforts, the funding request and how that project will be integrated, as well as the management and implementation plan and sustainability plan. I've written the word count and how many questions there are, so you can get a sense of how much of a writing lift this is. So please reference this. Once you get through the narrative proposal, you'll be going into the budget and budget narrative. For this section, please review what the allowable use of SVPP is. Also calculating the local match to ensure that that is something that you can commit to in dollar amounts if your project is funded. Also review unallowable costs and know that indirect costs will not be funded for this through this program. The budget narrative sections contain the following. Sworn personnel is an unallowable expense for this project, so you will not be completing that section. Civilian personnel is an allowable cost, so that's anyone that gets hired to manage the SVPP project. Travel is an allowable cost if it's a part of your project. That could look like visiting another district to see how they've implemented a similar project, or conferences, training. Equipment is everything that is technology related, and supplies. This is smaller purchases. In the guidelines, it's described as like postage or paper, ink, anything that is used as those small accessory purchases for your project. Subawards are allowable in this project. So if you have a group of school districts that would like to apply, there's one primary school district that's applying, and they will be subawarding to everyone else. There's a section for procurement contracts if you're getting help from consultants, as well as a section for other costs that don't necessarily fit into the above categories, but necessary for your projects. And indirect costs, there's a section in the guidelines that you should reference. Most indirect costs are unallowable, but there are several exceptions that are made. And we'd like to note at this point, I know many of you are thinking of technology as a part of the budget. So to strengthen this portion, we would like to give you the following considerations to have and to justify within your narrative section and your budget narrative. For any acquisition of technology, a positive school climate is paramount for learning, and technology should not feel like a punitive or prison-like atmosphere, or rely on discriminatory stereotypes, or violate student privacy, generate fears, or traumatize students who may have already been living in unsafe environments. So please address how your technology purchase is not doing those things. Technology can't compensate for inherent building design weaknesses, something to consider, as well as training. Technology without training can prove ineffective. So please, in your narrative, describe how you're training with the technology that you're acquiring. There's also consideration around the culture of your school, and how technology can be circumvented if there isn't a culture that is fostered. Technology may rapidly evolve along with software, so consideration must be given to replace, maintain, and repair costs. That's more in the sustainability aspect of your project. Long-term support for the technology is a key factor, explaining how you plan to use this technology. And the technology selection should focus on addressing a specific problem that you've identified. So we'll get back to what's required in the application. The last section is the supportive documents. In the first presentation, we went over the need for consultation as an eligibility factor for this grant. So this is a place where you can upload some of those proofs that you've gone through a consultation. You can also be uploading risk assessments and reports that support your justification for your program. The supportive documents types that are allowed are MOUs from your partners, letter of support from law enforcement and other partners, action reports or assessments, and consultation documents. So if you consulted for law enforcement, for example, that could be meeting agenda or minutes. If you consulted licensed mental health professionals, probably minutes would be an appropriate one. So this is ways that you can prop up your justification. So that completes the overview of the SVPP application. Now we'll go into what resources are available to you. First, the COPS website. This is how you'll get the official solicitation, as well as the resource guide, the fact sheets, the sole justification consultant fact sheets, if you're thinking of using any of those tools, and then a frequently asked document that's been put together by COPS. You will need to click on that triangle to see all of these links. So please be aware of that. It doesn't show up immediately when you go to the COPS website. The COPS office is responsive to emails and calls for this grant. So I've put up the contact information there. For very specific program information and eligibility, I would reach out to them. You can of course reach out to us, but we may refer you to them if it's specific to, if it seems like a specific case. You'll also have resources through us. We have application review, as mentioned earlier. We'll make sure that your narrative is aligning with the review criteria. We'll check for clarity, and we would love to have your application in by Monday, May 8th, to ensure that we have appropriate time to thoroughly review your application and give it back to you with enough time that you can implement those changes. But we will love to receive them before as well. You'll have the Bluum grant guides available. So we have the phase 2 of the guide coming out. This will be available after this presentation, which goes through the steps that we discussed today. You'll see how you can align the narratives to the review criteria. There's outlines and templates that you can use, as well as material checklists and timeline templates. We've been hosting these informational webinars that are available for you to review. This is recorded, so that is a resource that's available. And we have our 15-minute one-on-one support line where you can book a time with us to talk about your application. And that concludes the presentation, and I'm seeing questions, so I'll open it up to Sarah to ask away.
Yeah, we do have some questions. Thanks, Andrea. That was awesome. Our first question is, for the questions asking to list percentages of schools in your jurisdiction, is this only to include schools to be impacted by the grant, or are we included total number of schools in jurisdiction, even if not impacted by the grant?
So wait, can you repeat the first part?
Sure. For the question asking to list the percentage of schools in your jurisdiction, is this only to include schools that are going to be impacted by the grant, or do they need to include the total number of schools in their jurisdiction?
I believe it's total number of schools for the COPS office to know how big of a district this is. But I can double check and get back to our asker.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Our next question is, does technology potentially include licensing subscriptions to advanced features of an existing CCTV system?
Sure. I think that's a question. So it's software related. Looks like, right?
A licensing subscription, I believe, to a software.
Licensing subscription. In the solicitation, there is an allowability for or licensing. It can't exceed the 3 years that the funding period is. You might have to look a little bit closer to see if an accompanying technology purchase is necessary, or if an upgrade is completely allowable. So those are some considerations, but in the solicitation, it does allow those other costs that are within these security systems.
Great, thank you. For the civil personnel, can this include employees that are already hired at the school?
Civil personnel,
Civilian personnel?
civilian personnel's, in the solicitation, it does say that they must be hired on the date or during the period of performance. So you might have to reconfigure to see if you might have to assign a different title or redo some sort of contract with them. So I would check in with the COPS office, but in the solicitation, it does say hired after the performance period.
Our next question is, as a school entity, do you have to have an outside community match partner, or could the school district pay the match portion?
So the local match is, you can have a private source for that fund, but it would be you receiving that fund and then paying the match, not the entity paying it directly to COPS.
Our next question is, will the district's demographics be a deciding factor in having the grant awarded?
I think there in the application, you're justifying this as something that your population needs. So I don't think it's so much the demographic makeup of your students. It's more of what those student needs are. So I think I would consider that. And of course, it's if you get into demographics, it is a part of making sure that any technology or program that you operationalize through the grant isn't discriminatory. So that's one portion that you might have to consider.
And our next question is, are private K-12 schools eligible for this grant?
Private schools are ineligible for this grant to be their primary applicant, but you can certainly be a site for a eligible entity, say local law enforcement, to have a site at your school to implement those measures. So you will have to partner with an eligible entity.
Our next question, we have two questions that are a bit similar. For the civilian personnel, can this include a school employee or someone to write and manage the grant in the cost?
So this is a part of the implementation of SVPP. So I would say that it's allowable, would double check, but it is a part of managing SVPP. So I would, most likely it is an eligible expense.
Okay, great. And then our next question is, could you please elaborate a bit on what types of things the grant can be used for? This will be helpful for the schools to understand what they can apply for and potentially offer a bit of a broader scope of things they may have thought that they could not utilize these funds for.
Sure. I'm going to fast forward to the first slide. So SVPP covers the following statutes for, so this is like project themes that are allowable. So acquisition and installation of technology that expedite notification during an emergency, coordination with local law enforcement, placement of school hardening, such as metal detectors, locks, lighting, and other deterrent measures, and training local law enforcement officers to prevent school violence. So as long as they're in that, your project is within that scope, then it's allowable through SVPP, and your next step is to make sure that the costs that are associated with your project is aligned with the list of approved allowable costs.
Thank you. And then it looks like our last question is, there's a question asking if we are also applying to the DOJ grants available. If we are indeed applying to other DOJ grants, will this impact our chances of receiving the SVPP grant?
All of the grants that are out right now, they're all separate. They won't, they're not cross-checking to see if one grant, it's independent. The scoring process is independent, but what you can't do is overlap your costs. So they all have to be distinct projects. And that's why it's allowable and it won't interfere with your chances of receiving SVPP if you apply for the DOJ STOP grant.
Okay, great, thank you. I think that's all the questions we have in our chat and the Q&A, but like Andrea said previously, if you think of a question, feel free to reach out to grants@bluum.com and we can help.
Absolutely.
Yes, of course. So if Andrea, if you're finished and don't have anything else, we're gonna go ahead and stop the recording. We really appreciate you all attending, and you will also receive all of this information in a follow-up email coming soon.
Great, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.